Okay, my name is Kim Crawmer, and I own a farm called Prancing Pony Farm. And I do not raise ponies. I raise dairy goats and the Maremma Sheepdogs. And I have been a dog lover all my life, since I was a little kid. My first dog was a boxer when I was a baby. And I started grooming dogs when I was 14. I just walked into a dog grooming shop and asked if I could have a job sweeping up the dog hair, and they said no, I could have a job bathing and brushing dogs. So I actually encountered my first livestock guardian dogs through that job. They were, of course, Great Pyrenees, and there were a couple of Couvas. But I didn't really know what a livestock guardian dog was. So always had dogs. I used to breed Cocker Spaniels, and I always planned to have a farm one day. I had horses since I was about 14 also, and I was planning to have a farm, but I got married when I was 19 or 19. Got married, and my husband was in the Navy, and we just like moved all over the place. So I couldn't really have that farm, except for we did have a short little time where we lived in Virginia, and we had a farm there. But mostly we just moved around, and I had my horses, and I boarded them at boarding stables. And so we just kind of did that. And I always planned that when I one day did get my farm, I would have some type of like herding dog, like probably Australian Shepherds. I really liked them a lot. But what I always noticed where I boarded my dogs was that herding dogs chase and herd, because that's what they are supposed to do. So over time, I realized that wasn't going to really work very well with smaller animals like goats and chickens. And that's when as I was getting closer to my husband retiring, that's when I started hearing about livestock guardian dogs. And I realized that was actually the type of dog I needed, but I didn't really know anything about breeds. So we bought this farm. We had a farm in Virginia for a few years, but we sold that farm and moved back to California. And so while I was out there, that's where I experienced predator problems, because we did have goats on that farm, and we had our horses, and we had poultry, and I started realizing predators could be a problem. So that's what kind of got me knowing that I had to have something for protection. And coyotes are very bad here where we live, and a lot of the boarding stables where I boarded my horses, if you had chickens and you leave them outside one night without shutting them in the coop, you won't have chickens tomorrow. So we were buying this farm, and we bought it at the end of 2015. And I was like, okay, I'm getting some goats, because I'd already, arranged to buy some goats, and they were going to come home in early January 2016. And I was really concerned about how I was going to keep them alive. And so I just started looking around at different dogs, and I went on Craigslist, and I called, and whatever ads were there. And mostly what I saw was Great Pyrenees. And I've narrowed it down to two breeders. One had Great Pyrenees, and she was both of these breeders. The Great Pyrenees breeder had registered Great Pyrenees, and then I found a Maremma breeder who had his dogs were registered, but he wasn't registering the puppies at that time. But he had Maremmas, and he has an Angora goat farm in Eureka, California. And so I talked to both of these breeders, and the Great Pyrenees breeder was like, well, they are hard to keep in, but, with 6 strands of barbed wire and, all this stuff, we can kind of do it. And she kept telling me how there were certain dogs that she had problems. They were killing stock. And, and that's what I had heard, is that sometimes because Great Pyrenees have been used for companion dogs and show dogs, they're not always, they don't always have the working instinct still in them, and that they are pretty hard to contain. They call them the great wanderies and the disappear. And so, that's what she was saying. And that's also what the Maremma breeder was telling me about Great Pyrenees. And he was telling me how his Maremmas stayed put, and they were fantastic with the goats, and just, wonderful dogs. And he's the one that convinced me. I'm like, sold. That's what I need. And so I bought my first Maremma from him, and I still own that dog. His name is Olaf. And he came home. He was 5 months old. He went right in with my goats because he'd been born with goats and he knew what goats were. And he was just a fantastic dog. And I always say I got into Maremmas by accident. But I always loved Cocker Spaniels. They were always my favorite dog. And as a dog groomer, I'd been around a lot of different types of dogs, but I never had a dog that I loved as much as Cocker Spaniels and never enough to want to breed. And it wasn't until I encountered Maremmas that I found my new favorite breed. Mm-hmm. And I just fell in love with the dogs. Mm-hmm. They're just a dog that would lay down its life to protect an animal of another species is just really something special. So, they were originated in Italy, central Italy, and they go back to ancient times. Lots of stories and depictions and whatever. They were basically what they were bred for is to protect sheep from wolves. And that's still what they do in Italy. Not as much because shepherding is not as, sheep farming is not as big of a thing there as it used to be, but that's what they do. They fight off wolves. And some people, they're one of the smaller livestock guardian dog breeds. So some people think that they can't, they're not big enough for some serious predators. But in my opinion, a wolf is a pretty serious predator. So, that's where they originated. And in the 1970s, they came to America as part of a livestock guardian dog project, like experiment, Hampshire College, Raymond Coppinger. And they were trying out non-lethal predator, control methods. And they brought Maremmas along with some other breeds over. And there's some really fascinating books and information on that. And they're not an AKC breed. They're registered by the Maremma Sheepdog Club of America. Mm-hmm. And I don't know exactly when they started registering the dogs, but I think they've been around about 30 years or so. So they still are they're also registered by the UKC, but the Maremma Sheepdog Club of America is the main registry. Mm-hmm. And people that breed them like it that way and want it to stay that way. Mm-hmm. They feel like, AKC, a lot of times dogs, especially working dogs that get into the AKC world, become show dogs and they lose a lot of their working instincts. So, mm-hmm. I don't know.
What is the supposed lineage? Do they have a Great Pyrenees mixed into them originally? And
they're related. So they're all those white dogs. There's several different. They call them the Great White Dogs. Mm-hmm. So Great Pyrenees are from France, and Maremmas are from Italy, and then there are like the Kuvas, and then there are some Turkish different Akbash dogs, different ones like that. They're not. I mean, they're probably all related as far as way back. This is, before they had registries to really know which dog came from where. They're actually rewriting the standard right now. Mm-hmm. You can go on and read the standard. They're very similar to Great Pyrenees as far as, their body type and shape and all that. Great Pyrenees kind of tend to be a little bigger, and Great Pyrenees can have some different color shadings. Maremmas are basically white, although sometimes they'll have a little bit of like apricot or lemony kind of shading on their ears, but not like the badger markings or the black spots or anything like some other, like Great Pyrenees and a few other breeds do. They're pretty much white. Mm-hmm. But as far as the size, it's always been traditionally said that Maremmas were about 100 pounds for males and like 75 to 80 or 90 for females. But most people's Maremmas these days are bigger than that, or a lot of people's Maremmas are bigger than that. Like I have 4 breeding males, and one of them's kind of young, and I don't really know what his weight is, but the 3 that are adults they're all probably between 130 and 150 pounds. And then I have females that are anywhere between maybe 70 to like 115, with most of them probably being in the 80 to 90 pound range. So actually, I was contacted by one of the board members of the Maremma Club not too long ago, asking me how much my dogs weighed, because they were rewriting the standard because it doesn't really fit dogs. It's like humans. We all used to be smaller, but over time we've gotten bigger. So, but they have the long, double coat, and even the coat type is very different. I have my dogs, a lot of them look different. They look the same, but they look different. So some of them have more of a slick coat. Some of them have a lot thicker coat. Their face shapes can be different. Because we're breeding for working ability primarily. So even though we want good conformation, obviously a structurally sound dog is important. But I always say beauty is as beauty does. So if it can't work, it doesn't matter how perfect its conformation is. So, right. Well, working ability is absolutely number one. I look for dogs that are safe and reliable and dependable with livestock, first of all, and protective of them. There are people who are breeding dogs who are beautiful dogs and have good hip scores and have good, protective instincts, but they're not safe. And a lot of that has to do with how you socialize the puppies. But it's genetics too. It's kind of both. But so that's first. I mean, if a dog, like, I won't even breed a dog if it gets to maturity and I've had dogs that were breeding candidates, and I ended up spaying them because they're just not safe with livestock, or not safe enough. They can get there, but if it takes forever and a lot of work to get them there, I don't want to breed that. Right. So that's first. And then I'm looking at, good conformation and all that. But we do pen hip testing. Nothing is bred until they have had their pen hip testing. And OFA is good too, but for me, pen hip is the better. It's more scientific and mathematical. And if I'm going to pay, a lot of money for the hip testing, I want it to be, it's a little more expensive. It's a lot more expensive actually, but it just gives you a really good, look at their hips and everything. And that is a problem. I mean, there's young dogs being diagnosed with hip dysplasia because breeders aren't testing and aren't making good decisions. So that, and I do DNA, like in bark testing or whatever, but there's not a lot of problems that Maremmas have that are picked up by those type of tests, but I think they're still good to do. And also looking at inbreeding coefficients and stuff like that because Maremmas are a small breed, especially in America. So we try to keep the inbreeding as low as possible. And I have a lot of diversity in my program. I have dogs that I've gotten from breeders here in America, and I also have an imported dog, an imported male. I haven't used him yet, but I imported him specifically to bring in some new genetics. Yes. I haven't owned a Great Pyrenees or any other livestock guardian dog breed, so I can't really say what my experiences are with them. I can only say what I've heard. And, like I said, what I've heard is that Great Pyrenees tend to, and a lot of livestock guardian breeds tend to patrol a lot more and kind of, so they're more prone to wandering because they'll look out and see in the distance, oh, that's my territory, I got to go check it out. And then they go there, and then they keep going, and they keep going. Where Maremmas are what's called close-in guardians. So they tend to stick a lot closer to the herd or flock or whatever, and just kind of hang out mostly with the animals. And then if they see something, they'll go out and patrol, and they'll go out and investigate, but then they come back. So they tend to be a lot more respectful of fencing. They still do need a fence. Like, I get people that will say, oh, I don't have a fence, but I just have a big orchard. Can I have a Maremma? And I'm like, nope, you need a fence, because they need a boundary. But they tend to really respect it and be, good with it. And even I have a couple of dogs that can jump the fence because I have a couple of small females, and they just, I say they're nosy, and sometimes they want to check out what's on the other side of the fence. But even when they have jumped the fence, they never wandered off. They just steps to make sure they can't do that, because we live on a busy road and I don't want a dog getting hit by a car or something like that. But my dogs can put their feet up on the fence, and most of them wouldn't even think of going out. And they're just, I like a dog that's going to stay there and stay close to the animals and, really be protective and paying attention. I have a friend who has Anatolians, and she loves her dogs, but they're never home. They're always off, wandering off, checking out she lives near a national park, and they're always in the park going to visit people that are picnicking or whatever. She's like, my dogs are gone again. I'm like, how can they guard your goats if they're never home?
Right.
So they're really great. They're super affectionate with people they know. Some of them are real friendly with other people, and some of them are more standoffish with strangers and need to get to know people. I personally prefer my dogs to not be super friendly with strangers, because goat theft is sometimes a problem where I live, and I want my dogs to not just let anybody walk in. And so I have a lot of customers that come all the time to pick up goats and pick up puppies and whatever, and my dogs will bark as soon as somebody comes. I call them my alarm system, and so they'll bark. And then once they see that I'm out there and I'm talking to the person and everything is good, then they stop and they just go lay down and they're quiet and they're happy. But don't walk into the pasture without permission because they wouldn't appreciate that. So.
And let's say there is a coyote that gets too close. What are they like when they engage? Have you seen it, or have you heard about it?
I've seen it. Yes, I have seen it. Coyotes don't really come on my place anymore, but they used to. I used to have fewer dogs, and so they would still kind of come up to the edges of the fence and kind of mess around. And especially in the spring, when I had a lot of, that's when I have most of my baby goats born, is in like February, March, and they would kind of come as close as they could get. And sometimes, like, I have a certain type of duck called the call ducks, and all of my poultry are inside the pastures except for the call ducks, and they can fly, so I can't keep them in. And I would buy the ducks, and I'd start out with 25 or 30 ducks, and then by the end of the year, I'd have 2 or 3. And same with barn cats. They would snatch the barn cats. So now that I've got more dogs, and I've also extended my fencing to more of my property, I don't have as much of a problem. But a couple of years ago, I have this little area, we call it the cul-de-sac, and it's a little cutout area where we have a haystack there, and it's fenced on 3 sides. So there's a barnyard on one side, there's a big pasture on the back side, and there's a smaller pasture on the other side. And then the open side is the road. And this coyote came over there because there were baby goats over there. And he walked up near that haystack thinking he was going to get an easy meal. Well, there were dogs on all 3 sides. There were probably 2 or 3 dogs on every side. And all of a sudden, the dogs were just going nuts because they saw that coyote. And he got so scared, he just kept kind of running back and forth. And he was and the dogs couldn't get him. They were behind the fence, but he didn't understand that. And the dogs kept matching every move he made. And they were running back and forth on all the sides and just, barking and growling and going nuts. And I was just standing there like yelling, like in shock that this was going on. All of a sudden, that coyote got so scared, he forgot where the road was, and he jumped over the fence into the pasture, into my horse pasture, where there were a few goats too. And I had one big adult male dog in there, and I had a couple of like 4 to 5 month old puppies. Those dogs chased him across the pasture. He jumped over the fence and ran out the other side. And I swear he told his friends, don't ever go back there, because I've never had a coyote come that close again.
Wow.
but I hear them a lot. Yeah, they're out there. They're howling and it gets crazy. But
And
the
if they
dogs.
have you heard if Maremma actually has to engage, it could dispatch of a Cody, no problem, correct?
Oh yeah, it could. I mean, it's never happened because they're just not going to come that close. That one only came that close by accident, but they definitely could if they can fight off a wolf, then they're definitely going to fight off a coyote.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes my dogs get into fights between themselves. We try to avoid that as much as possible, but it happens, and I've seen them fight each other, and there's no doubt in my mind that they could take out a coyote. And there's no doubt in my mind which ones would be the most likely to take out a coyote. And that coyote that came that day was lucky. He was in Simba's pasture and not one of the other dogs. Simba's big, but he's slower.
Yeah.
So, but.
And could you talk about the differences in personalities between the males and the females?
That's a big question that a lot of people ask about like working ability, and I don't really see any difference as far as gender. There might be difference as far as individual dogs. There is differences, for that. But I think male and female both make equally good livestock guardian dogs. And so it just depends on your individual situation, your preferences. I do believe very, very strongly in only working my dogs in at least pairs. I never have a dog guarding by itself ever. And so a lot of times if you're going to have a pair, it is oftentimes better to have either a male and female pair or possibly two males as long as they're neutered. Because two females, sometimes even two females that are spayed, sometimes some of them get along, but they're less likely to get along than male-female. And even sometimes male-female will have their little scuffles too. But it just seems like male-female pairs are the easiest. But as far as working ability, they're both great. I mean, it's kidding season right now. I've got baby goats out there, and they have two males, one male and two females guarding them right now. There was a third female in there, but I needed her some more, so I moved her. So a lot.
Yeah.
They shed a lot. But, outside, they don't shed. Or outside they shed, but it's like any double-coated breed, they're going to shed seasonally. So you're going to get a lot of that, especially in the spring, and then they'll shed again in the fall. All my dogs are shedding right now. The hair is just, there's just clumps. Some of them, it depends on their coat. Some they just kind of naturally shed out really easily, and you don't have to do a whole lot to them. Other ones, they need kind of help. You have to really do some grooming and help get that undercoat out, or it can get matted. And I do not recommend shaving them down. That double coat serves a purpose to insulate them and protect them from both cold and heat. But if you have to, sometimes it has to be done, but it's best if you can get ahead of it and, brush it out. And you can use a blower, like a heavy duty dog blow dryer, bathing them and then blow drying them out, or even blow drying them dry. A lot of times we'll get a lot of that loose hair out. But if you have one in the house, and that's another whole subject, they shed all year round. Yeah. But as far as guardian dogs, and they shed mud, like they love the mud and the rain, and they'll go out and they'll get so dirty, and you just think, oh my gosh, that dog is a mess. And when the coat dries, the mud just falls off. So it's pretty cool.
And how well do they take the heat and the cold?
They take the cold extremely well, because they come from mountainous regions, and that's just their natural climate. I've sold a lot of puppies to places like Massachusetts and New Hampshire and Canada, and they have to have a little bit of extra protection for their dogs in the really bad weather, but still they do really well, and they love the snow. But they do fine too. Obviously, it's not really their natural thing, but where we live, it gets really hot. We get to like 110, 115 at the peak of summer, and as long as they have good shade and plenty of water. I like to give them little shallow horse troughs that they can stand, filled with water that they can get in if they want to. A lot of them like to do that. So they'll get in that, take a little dip, and they like to dig a hole, and make a nice little spot. And they do fine. I don't have any problems. Some people will say I can't have a Maremma because it has too much hair and it's too hot, whatever. I'm like, let me tell you what, it is hot in Central California in the summer, and I've never had a problem. I feel like my goats have more of a problem with the heat than my dogs do, because goats are silly and they'll run around and get themselves all worked up and hot.
Right.
And goats hate water, so you can't just hose them down to cool them off. So the dogs, they love the water mostly. Some of them don't, but most of them will just go stand in the little, wading pool or little short trough or whatever. So,
are they more nocturnal?
Yeah, they're still going to be awake, and you walk out there during the day, they're going to say, hey, and they're going to be fine, but they're definitely more nocturnal. They do a lot of laying around in the daytime, especially when it's hot. They're just conserving their energy, but they're nocturnal more because predators are. So that's when they're up, and that's when you'll hear barking, because they're either barking at something or they're barking to warn stuff away. But they don't necessarily bark nonstop. So, especially adult dogs, they learn to be more discerning. So a younger dog will bark more because it hasn't quite figured everything out yet. A single dog will bark more because it's feeling more insecure. But when you have older adult dogs, they've kind of figured things out and they know what to bark at and what to not bark at. So it's not, to me, I feel like a lot of my neighbors' companion dogs bark as much as my Maremmas do. So, and my own companion dogs bark as much as my Maremmas do. So
right.
And I feel like the barking is, the sound of the barking gives me peace of mind because I know they're doing their job. So
yeah, exactly. I have a livestock guardian dog too. That it can be annoying, but it definitely warns dirtbags and four-legged predators to watch out.
Right.
Back to the standard, just real quickly. What is a typical height of some of your dogs?
I haven't actually measured them, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I could look it up and tell you right now, but you can do that yourself. I don't really know, but they range in height. I mean, I just kind of measure it by, are you bigger than my goat or smaller than my goat? Most of them are way bigger than my goats, and I have medium-sized goats. I have small and medium-sized. I have mini Nubians and Nigerian dwarfs. So some of the males are real tall, and some of the females are a little smaller. Like I have a female boxer, and she's real small, but she's probably, I don't know how tall she is. But anyway, my Maremma puppies that are like 5 months old are already bigger than her. So they grow fast. Like most of those puppies right now are probably 60 to 70 pounds. And I don't know how tall they are. I don't know how tall my goats are either. I haven't really measured any of them.
Well, you're a true work.
All of mine have done really well. I haven't really had any problems. I've known people that have. I know someone who's had to have C-section on her dog. I don't really know the details of why that happened, but I haven't really had any problems with mine so far. Most of the time, I would say an average litter is probably 8 or 9. I have had a litter of 11 and a litter of 13. And they did not have any problems at all. When I have litters that size, I will weigh the puppies every day for at least a couple of weeks just to make sure everybody is gaining weight. And if there are any puppies that seem to be struggling a little bit, I might supplement them. Even a litter, I've started doing it even with a litter of like 9 or so. Even like I'll weigh all the puppies in the beginning, but then if I have a bigger litter, I'll kind of extend it longer. And so sometimes I'll supplement, once or twice a day, just to make sure they're gaining. But usually I don't have to. And the moms whelp easily, and they're usually good moms. They do get to a point, and this is true with any dog, they'll get to a point where they're done. Yeah. They're like, I'm done with these puppies. And, I don't let my puppies go until they're at least 12 weeks old. And I think it's very important for the puppies to learn from adult dogs how to be guardians, and learn from the livestock too, especially the livestock. I consider the livestock the trainers too. So I learned early on. Well, my first dogs were just really great moms, and they were very patient and whatever. But then I had a dog here and there that was like, okay, those puppies are 8 or 9 weeks old and she's getting snappy with them or whatever. And so I learned, and also had the advice of my breeder, or my friend who used to be a breeder and now is a trainer, that it's time to let mama go back to work and bring in a puppy mentor. So I have certain adult dogs that are just really great with puppies. So I'll bring one of them in and let the mom, go back and do her job. And one of those puppy mentors, actually one of my very best one, is my first female Maremma that I got. And she's just really great and really patient. The puppies can jump all over her and bite on her and, whatever. And she doesn't care. So I'll bring that dog in. And, the puppies can continue learning without, because you don't want, there are people who believe that you should, that the adult dogs teach the puppies lessons by being kind of aggressive with them and, getting after them and biting them and teaching them manners and whatever. I absolutely do not believe in that. If you allow adult dogs to be aggressive with puppies, you teach puppies to either be aggressive or be fearful or both. And that can lead to a lot of problems. So that's why any dog that can, I don't mind if the puppy's getting, too rough or something and they kind of tell them off. But if a dog is consistently getting aggressive with the puppy, I take them away. I change the situation. Because that's just not, to me and to a lot of people that I respect, that's not the right way to train puppies. So I strongly believe that the puppies need to be near livestock as soon as possible, as early as possible, but they also need to be safe. So I started out from my very first litter whelping my puppies in my goat barn, and I had a stall set up where they were near the goats, and they could see them and hear them and smell them from the time they were little tiny, and then gradually they were introduced into the herd. And I just, that worked really well until I started breeding more, and until I started running into times of year that weren't, it was either really, really cold or really, really hot, and it was just difficult. And some people will bring their puppies in the house and raise them and then bring them out with the livestock when they're older. And for me, that's just not right. Puppies have critical socialization windows. And if you don't get them out with the livestock somewhere, at least by the time they're 3 or 4 weeks old, you've lost it. If you wait till they're 8, 9, 10 weeks old, you've missed it. You'll never get that back again. That's the most important time. So when I started having problems with, the weather and whatever, I decided to build a dedicated whelping facility. So I have this building that we had built, and I call it my puppy parlor because I also milk my goats in there. And it's set up so that it has indoor-outdoor kennels that go out into the goat pasture, and it's all nice and it can be clean. It's concrete floor, and it's got everything. I have a puppy incubator and heating incubator and oxygen unit. If I have any puppies that have a little bit of trouble in the beginning, I can put them in there and that'll pink them up really fast. It's got grooming equipment and a grooming tub and just all the stuff I need. So the puppies are well there. The goats come and go and they're nearby. And then as the puppies grow, we take them out and we integrate them in with the herd. They spend time more and more as they get bigger, as they start coming out of the whelping box and everything. And I also believe that puppies need other socialization. So they need the socialization with the livestock, but they also need socialization with people. They need all kinds of novel experiences. They need positive experiences, exposed to as many things as possible. So that's where I really work a lot. We use a program called Puppy Culture that's all about that positive start for puppies and socialization and all that kind of stuff. We use clicker training. We only use positive reinforcement training. So I'm exposing the puppies to all different kinds of stuff. We have music in there. We have sounds like, vehicle sounds and thunderstorm sounds and all kinds of stuff. The Amazon Alexa thing is really useful for playing all kinds of interesting sounds and stuff like that. And it's more of just facilitating what they need and supervising and exposing them to a lot of different stuff. They really, most of their learning is passive learning. They're watching the goats, they're watching the nearby chickens, they're learning the language of the animals, they're watching the adult dogs, and they're just kind of passively learning. But there's a lot of other stuff you can add to that. It's very valuable because it seems like with livestock guardian dogs, there's either people that raise them as companion dogs and they don't really give them any exposure to livestock, or they just throw them out with the livestock and don't give them any exposure to everything else. And they need both. Because most of these dogs are not, most farms are not thousands of acres, and these dogs are integrated into family life and smaller farms and whatever, and they need to learn to get along in that type of environment. They need to be safe if you take them to the vet or whatever, and that's where I experienced with my first Maremma. He was really good with the goats, but the guy didn't really handle him, and he just he wasn't aggressive at all, but he just was really scared, and I think you can suppress it by doing the wrong thing.
Yes.
Like there are breeders who, and I have bought dogs from such breeders who, unfortunately, when I didn't understand, that raised their dogs as companion dogs, basically. And so if they're not getting that exposure when they're young, they've missed those critical socialization windows, and it really can be hard for them to. They can turn out to be okay livestock guardian dogs, but they never live up to their full potential because they've just had a whole different socialization. They're looking for, the patio or the pool or the house, the couch, whatever. And they're like, what are these funny looking animals running around here? So,
what I've noticed, here's another thing I've noticed. I've noticed that livestock guardian dogs have more confidence, and they're less boisterous and they're less boastful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They don't rely on their looks. They're confident in their abilities, and if something happens, they will take care of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I've had people that I either turned away from the beginning or kind of dissuaded. Or I've had people who I took a reservation fee, and I don't usually refund reservation fees, but a few times I've been like, you know what, this isn't the right situation. Here's your money back. And it doesn't happen very often because I do a really good job of communicating with people before we get to that process. I have a puppy questionnaire with like 1 million questions, and all those questions came up because of situations. Some of those questions are on there specifically because of people that I later said, no, thank you. So like one person, she said she had livestock, and I think she did, and she had some livestock guardian dog breeds, but she also bred doodles, and I do not have a problem with doodles, but I have a huge problem with crossing any livestock guardian dog with any non-livestock guardian dog, because you get a very, you don't know what you're going to get. You're not going to get a dog that can be trusted to guard the stock and herd it. It just doesn't work that way. So I started getting the feeling that she was wanting to buy, and she wanted a female, and she wanted a specific female, from one of my specific dogs. And I just was like, she's planning to breed Maremma doodles. We're not going there. So I just told her, hey, I don't have any females available. Do you want a male? And she said, no, I'll wait for your next litter. And I said, no, I think we're just going to, here's your money back. So I've had that type of situation. I had another situation where someone was going to, he had a really big ranch in Texas, and he was like, we have like dogs in 20 dog packs, and you know, we go out and check on them once a month and that type of thing. And at first I said yes, and then the more I was like, I think that situation is great for a lot of dogs, but that's not how I raise my dog. And I just can't imagine sending my puppies who get this much different experience and saying, okay, now you're just out on the range, you know? So, I mean, they can do that, but most of my puppies go to smaller farm. I mean, some have a small farm is 100 acres, but most of them are probably a couple acres to like 20, you know, and they're more like a family doing their little homestead thing, you know, or raising some sheep or some chickens, or, I mean, some are, you know, just more like, they're definitely livestock guardian dogs, but they're also very much part of the family, which is what my dogs are. You know, every single one of my dogs meets me at the gate with a wagging tail and a smiling face every day. I go around, feed all my dogs. My son feeds the goats and horses, and I feed the dogs. And they're all very happy to see me and excited. We'll do a little clicker training sometimes, whatever. And then they go back and do their job. So that's the type of homes I look for my dogs. And that's the type of, I feel like not every breeder is right for every person. So people gravitate to what they're, you know, what they're looking for, you know. If you're using your dogs, that's what I tell people is really important. However you want to use your dogs, find a breeder that uses their dogs that way. So if you want your dogs to guard your pool or your patio, you know, or whatever, find that breeder. There are breeders out there that do that. But if you want your dogs to be out there with your baby goats or your chickens or your sheep or whatever and be perfectly safe, then find a breeder that raises and uses their dogs that way. And I have over 100 baby goats a year. That's my biggest thing. I keep saying I'm going to cut back, but it doesn't ever happen. Right. So that's my most important thing. I also have chickens, ducks, geese, turkeys. I got the turkeys just to train puppies. I have horses and a mini donkey and mini horses. But those are all just kind of pets. The goats are the main thing. Yeah, so I've only turned down. Oh, I have turned down other people that wanted them as companions. I've kind of relaxed on that a little bit more lately. In the beginning, it was like nope, and I've relaxed on it a little bit more recently. But in the beginning, it was an automatic no. Now it's more of I'll look at each situation. So. No. Because I raise my puppies as definite working dogs, but I also give them a lot of, you know, interaction and positive training and all that kind of stuff. They're both human and livestock driven. You know, they love to go to work, but they also want to come over and say hello. And it's a lot of controversy among the Maremma world about whether Maremmas should even be companion dogs. I think it's the only livestock guardian dog breed where it's kind of a hot topic. And the Maremma Sheepdog Club of America doesn't officially endorse them as companions. But there are lots of Maremmas as companions. So somebody's doing it. They're just not admitting it. You know, somebody's selling them to companion homes. They're just not admitting it. And traditionally in Italy, in other countries, they've always served both purposes. So when I first got into Maremmas, I heard that, they can't be companion dogs. Don't, you know, that'll ruin them, whatever. And so I just kind of drank the Kool-Aid, basically, and that's what I did. But the more I had the dogs, the more I realized, okay, they're still dogs. You know, they're a different kind of dog, but they're still a dog. And, you know, in reality, that's how a lot of my families, you know, they're working dogs, but they still are definitely a part of the family, and they have a bond with humans, and they can bond with humans and still bond with livestock. So when I did start kind of relaxing a little bit on that, it was the dogs that convinced me. I had some people who bought the dog and had a farm, and then they sold the farm and they kept the dog, and the dog adjusted fantastically to that life. And then I had people who, if somebody comes to me and says, I want a Maremma, and I say, why? And they say, well, it's just so fluffy and cute. That's not the right answer.
Yeah.
It's your answer, but it's not the right answer for me. But there are good answers. So anyway, I have said yes a few times, and it has worked out wonderfully. And here's the way I see it. If that dog, so it seems like the people who do sell any kind of livestock guardian dog to a pet home say, I will sell my failed livestock guardian dogs to a pet home. In my opinion, if I can't trust that dog to guard chickens, I am not putting it in a family to guard children. I mean, I might put it with an adult, guy who likes to go hiking or whatever, but I'm not going to put it in a family. Right. So whenever I have placed a dog in a companion home, I raise them exactly the same. They get the same socialization, the same beginning with livestock. I look for the exact same temperaments. And, the parents, most of those dogs have been the parents have been my best guardian dogs. Their puppies also made great companions, and there's only a few of them, but they've just done wonderfully. And I actually have a companion Maremma of my own now. My daughter got married a couple of years ago, and her husband, they were wanting to get a dog for their family and have a dog named Polar. I bred her. She's from my second Maremma litter, and Polar was having puppies right before my daughter was getting married. And Jamie, my daughter, actually is the one that convinced me to keep Polar. At the time, I wasn't planning to keep a puppy from that litter, and she convinced me to keep her, and it was the best. I always say it was the best thing she ever did, because Polar is absolutely my best livestock guardian dog. And so Polar was having puppies, and the sire is Simba, one of my registered males. Polar is not registered. And my son-in-law, Joshua, really loves Simba. And so we talked about it a lot, and they were considering a German Shepherd, because Joshua has always had German Shepherds, but they really, he really loved Simba and Jamie. Polar was her dog, but she was going to be moving, and she couldn't take her dog, obviously, because I wouldn't give Polar up.
Yeah.
And so they ended up getting a puppy, and his name is Titus. And he was 5 months old when they finally got married and got their house and everything. And they took him. And they lived at Camp Pendleton Marine Base. And he just did fantastically. He didn't have any problems at all. My daughter had a boxer, and they were best buddies. And she'd take him to the dog park, and she'd take him on dog walks and walks. And he's just a wonderful dog. So it was kind of almost an experiment too, because I always considered keeping one of my puppies as a companion dog myself, but I already have 3 companion dogs, so I didn't really need a 4th dog in the house. Now I have them. But I thought, if my daughter takes him, I can see how it goes, and if there is a problem, he can always come home. Because that was part of what I also told people. If I sell you a companion dog and it doesn't work out, what am I going to do with it? Because my dogs are guardian dogs. I can't just necessarily put it out there with livestock if I don't know, if it's missed out on time with the stock or whatever. So it was kind of an experiment, and it was great. I mean, he did wonderfully, and there was no problem at all. But my daughter and her husband got transferred recently to North Carolina. He's in the Marines, and so she has, they have a little 1-year-old baby, and they were transferring, and she just felt like it was a lot for her, and she was worried that with Joshua deploying, that she would get out there and not be able to handle. And at the time, she had Emmett, her boxer, but he died recently. So she was just stressing about that. And so she asked me if I would take him back. Whether it's permanent or temporary, we don't really know yet. But she said, would you take him back? And I have a lifetime return policy on my puppies anyway. If anybody ever can't keep their puppy, or dog, they could always come back to me. So of course I said absolutely yes. But then I was like, well, what am I going to do with him? Because he's been living in, Navy Marine housing for 2 years. He's 2 years old. And I wasn't really worried about him with the livestock because he's a wonderful dog. But I just felt like he's lived that life. And so I just thought, well, we'll see how he goes. He'll live in my house and we'll see how he does. And he's just a wonderful dog. He's happy here and he loves it. And I say that my I have a Cocker Spaniel, a Shih Tzu, and a Boxer. And I always say they have their own livestock guardian dog. And they just, it's been a really interesting experience and firsthand learning what it's like.
Yeah.
So I still wouldn't automatically just anybody that wanted it, but it just depends on the situation. And I have another family that has one that they've actually done she's a Maremma, but they did the AKC, or is it called AKC Good Citizens? Something where they do all these certain things and then they get certified that they learn. This person came to me wanting a companion Maremma. Now she has chickens, so technically she has livestock, but she wanted it as a companion for her daughter. And it was going to live in her house, but she wanted, if it went outside, not to chase her chickens. So it's kind of like, and she had never even owned a dog at all. And I was like, oh no, but she had such a plan for this dog. She knew everything she was going to do. She was going to take it to training. She just convinced me to give it a try, and she has done wonderful with that dog. So she did the AKC Good Citizens, and then she's actually had her certified as a therapy dog.
Awesome.
So I'm just like, now I look at it more as what's the best home for my dogs.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I've had a few dogs that had to come back because, the person sells their farm and now they don't want to keep the dog or they can't keep the dog or, barking complaints or whatever. And I'm like, I'm going to go by the best home for the puppy, not by just some arbitrary standards.
Right.
Hip dysplasia is the main issue with Maremmas, and there will be breeders who will tell you, oh, it's not really a problem. You don't really have to worry about it. And that is usually because they're breeding dogs and pretending like it's not a problem. They don't want to spend the money or whatever on the testing, and it's a problem. I've known of cases of more than, I know personally of cases of dogs that were diagnosed with severe hip dysplasia at under a year old. Some dogs even had to be put to sleep because of it, or just probably won't have a long, life or a comfortable life or whatever. So it's definitely a concern. And, if you buy a livestock guardian dog, you need a working dog. And if you end up with a dog that is in so much pain that it can't work, that's an expensive mistake. So there's a push there's this thing that people think that livestock guardian dogs should be cheap, affordable dogs. That's a marketing thing. We breed affordable dogs. Can you really afford a dog that's going to have, debilitating hip dysplasia or other problems, be in pain? You might have to put it to sleep. You might have to find a new dog. Your animals won't be protected. So that's the main one, and the main way to protect against that is to hip test your dogs and make sure you're only breeding dogs with, really good scores. All my dogs that I'm breeding, I have dogs that I haven't bred yet, but all the dogs that I'm breeding have had their pin hips, and they're all way below average. Like their scores are way better than average. And then there's you can do the embark testing for, some of those other things, and you can do elbow dysplasia and things like that, but primarily hip dysplasia is the biggest one to watch out for with Maremmas. And very important, very, very important. I don't know. I've always been drawn to Australian Shepherds. I think they're really pretty dogs, and I think they have enough of a little bit of herding, but not quite as mean, I don't know personally, but it seems like they're not quite as intense as like a border collie. So I think they're pretty cool dogs. But and some days when I'm out there trying to chase my goats around and get them to go where I want them to go, I say I wish I had a part-time herding dog that could just come in and, help me get the goats over wherever I want them. But I don't have enough work for a herding dog, and I wouldn't want to have a herding dog out with my livestock guardian dogs, because I think that could be problematic. It might be okay if you have a really big ranch, but on a smaller place, I think, it would be too much conflict. The guardian dogs might learn some bad habits, or they might fight with the dog because it's doing the wrong things or whatever. So, and I have 4 dogs in my house already. So I probably won't ever have one. That's the breed I always thought I would have when I finally bought my farm.
Right.
But I ended up with Maremmas and fell in love with them. Even my husband, he never liked dogs. Our whole marriage, he just complained about our dogs. Why he married a dog crazy person, I don't know, but he thought he would get me to not, to kind of tone it down, and I didn't. And so he just was always, I can't stand dogs, And when we got these Maremmas, and he started watching them and seeing how they work and, paying attention, he will tell you it's the Maremmas that got him to love dogs. And now he loves dogs. He loves our house dogs. He loves the Maremmas. He's a little bit intimidated by them, but he doesn't walk into my pastures by himself. But he just really respects them. He knows what they do, and he just thinks it's amazing. And I think that woke him up, and he realized, I think he thought that all dogs were the same, and he realized they're not. There's a lot of variety and a lot of specialized, they do all different types of jobs and whatever. So
that's a great story.
Turned him into a dog lover.
What is it like breeding goats? What's the difference between breeding goats and dogs?
Well, I've come to realize that breeding goats is not very profitable. Okay. And it's a lot of work. I really love my goats. I've always loved goats. I had somebody brought in some I think Nubian goats from a dairy when I was working at my dog grooming job when I was a teenager, and they just didn't want the little wethers, and so here's a goat. Do you want it? And that's when I first fell in love with them. So I've always loved them. I had a couple of them here and there as pets. And then when we lived in Virginia, I had Nubian goats there. So I knew when I was going to get my farm that I was going to have goats. But I wanted smaller goats. So that's where I found out about Nigerians. But I always loved the Nubian look and the Nubian personality and all that. So I found out about mini Nubians. And I was like, I got to have some of those. So I started out with the goats, just planning to have them for milking for my own family. But I found out that they actually are pretty, sell pretty well, and they're fun and whatever. So I just started from there. I started with 6 goats, and now I don't really know how many I have because it kind of fluctuates, but it's probably around 75 adult goats. And usually I'll have 100 to 120 kids, because I have a spring season where I have most of my babies, and then I'll have a fall season of Nigerians, because Nigerians can breed year round. So I might have another 20 or 30 in the fall of those. So it just it built, because I was building my herd, and I was keeping kids and bringing in new stock and selling other ones and whatever. But the more I've gotten into breeding the Maremmas, I love my goats, and I always want to breed them, but I'll probably end up, I keep saying this and I never do it, but cutting back, because they're just, they sell well. My kids, I sell my goats for a lot more money than a lot of people do, and they sell well, but goats are kind of high maintenance. They get sick more often than a lot of animals. They're prone to pneumonia and parasites, which I don't have a lot of parasite problems here, but a lot of people do. Pneumonia is a problem. they waste a lot of hay. So, you see all that expensive hay you bought on the floor and they're peeing on it. You're like, that's my hay guy will say, your goats won't waste this hay. This is prime quality dairy alfalfa. And I'm like, you watch them.
Yeah,
They
right.
will. But where we live, we don't really have pastures because we don't get rain. We only get rain kind of in the wintertime. So I have to buy hay year round. My goats don't have grass to eat, or they don't really eat grass. They eat, trees. They're browsers, but we just don't have that for them to eat very much. So it's expensive to feed them. I think last year I probably spent almost as much on hay as I made on selling the kids. So I probably will. As I'm breeding the dogs more, I want to put more into the dogs. So I'm going to try to cut my herd back to the ones I really, really love the most and the best quality and all that, and have smaller kidding seasons. But also, here's another thing that I've really encountered is my goats are extremely valuable to me as puppy trainers. Mm-hmm. And every time they have babies, I lose them as puppy trainers because you don't put baby puppies with baby goats. It's just not appropriate, Mm-hmm. When the puppies are teeny tiny, 3 or 4 weeks old, you can. But once the puppies get, a little bit bigger, it's not safe. They're just puppies and they're rough and tumble, and, they could hurt the babies. So every time my goats have babies, then I lose them for 3 or 4 months. I can't have them as puppy trainers. So probably I'm going to just have, I finally realized I just need to not breed all my goats every season, every year. So I leave some back as puppy trainers, or maybe I'll just keep some specifically for training puppies and then keep some for breeding and sell some of the other ones. So you just can't do everything and do everything really well. And over time, I love the goats and I always want to have them, and I always want to have some baby goats around. I want to milk the goats and all that, but I just want to concentrate more on the dogs. I haven't actually made a profit because I put everything back in. Mm-hmm. I'm always, we need more fencing. I built this building. I spent $1 million on the building, but I paid for all of it and, cash flowed all of it. I did not go in any debt for anything. Mm-hmm. But I just continually put everything back into the program. But it's like I say, I'm always pushing to keep my prices as high as I can, and I'm always improving and whatever. And I'm like, if I don't at least break even, I can't stay in business. Mm-hmm. So I can't serve somebody down the road if I gave everybody here a deal. There's so many people, no matter what their business is, that I don't want to make too much money. I want to help people. I want to give people affordable puppies and whatever. And I'm like, but you won't be there next year or 5 years from now, and I want to be there. It took me forever to have this business. I was 50 years old before I finally got my farm because of my husband's Navy career. He was in the Navy for 40 years. So it took me forever to have it, and I'm going to enjoy it as long as I can.
No, I appreciate that.
How much? Last year, when I sell as many as I can, and then they get to weaning age, and then I start trying to go ahead and, I had my trainer friend in Oregon. I sent about a dozen with her to her ranch to help her train dogs. I was giving some of them to goat customers who'd already bought puppies or bought goats from me. Here, you want another one? Here's, you can have them. And then I also gave some of them as puppy trainers, which was really great because if somebody was buying a puppy and they didn't have a lot of livestock, because a lot of people are just starting their farm. Mm-hmm. So I would say these goats are already used to dogs. They're used to the Maremmas, and I would just give them some goats, some wethers for their puppies. So now that's my thing, is go ahead and sell as many as you can for as much as you can. But then when you get to this point with the boys, I don't give away girls because somebody's always going to want, I'll sell older does, I'll sell bred does, I'll sell does that are, just had kids and they're in milk. But the boys, that's, and I don't have a problem with people eating goats for meat, but I don't prefer it. I don't do it, and I don't want to sell. That's just not what I want to sell my kids for. So I try to find them pet homes as much as possible. I think there's a lot of people that are, and I've encountered this. I remember feeling this way myself, that are halfway afraid of livestock guardian dogs because there's so much misinformation out there. There's not a lot of information about them to begin with, and then there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of crazy stuff, especially like on social media and whatever. And I remember feeling like, oh, I don't know, being kind of nervous and afraid of my first dog or two, like. And the more I live with them, the more I realize they're just dogs. They're still they're different in ways, but I don't know. So, enjoy them. You can really enjoy them. They can still do their job, but you can enjoy their company and really build a relationship with them. And so, I think it really depends on the situation, the dedication of the owner, the dog itself. I'm sure there's a lot of livestock guardian dogs who aren't happy as companions, and they just want to be outside and whatever. And you do have to take things into consideration, like nobody's just going to walk in your house. You have to be properly introduced, so you have to understand stuff like that.
Yep.
And it's a little different, if your livestock guardian dog is out in your pasture, most of the time people aren't just walking into your pasture without permission. But if they're in your house, and I had my vet was over doing something with one of my dogs, and her tech came in to help me look for something in the house. We were looking for a extension cord or something. And he just walked in, and Titus was like, whoa, he surprised him. There's a strange man in my house, and I just kind of grabbed his collar and said, okay, let's go over here, Titus. But once he meets you and gets to know you, he loves everybody. Yeah. But I don't even lock my doors because nobody's going to get on my place. First of all, they're not even going to get on the place without all my dogs warning me, and then they're sure as heck not coming in the house. So.
Yep.